Good evening, everybody. If it is evening for you, wherever you are in the world, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello.
So beautiful to see everybody here. We've got people in. And if everybody wants to just tell us where you're connecting from in the chat box, that way we can say hi to you. Luca, come stai?
I'm good, sto bene. Tu come stai?
Bene, bene.
How is everyone? Come state?
Right, let's see how everybody is. Yay, Olivier! We've got Olivia with us. We've got Oriane. Yes, Liane as well. Sarah, Tinea, Laila. Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. I've got some familiar faces here. And very, very excited because we've got Luca back. And Luca already, was it a month ago, Luca, that we did the last webinar?
Yes, just about, yeah.
Wow. Wow. So much has happened, huh, since then?
So much.
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness. Oh, goodness. Welcome. We've got people connecting from France, Moldova. I think we've got people from all over the world. Uzbekistan. Wow. Oybek. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Now, just to let everybody know, there will be certificate links in the chat box. So do keep an eye on the chat box. Gary will keep sending that link throughout. I just want to say patience for those certificates because we are a small team and we do everything from our heart, free with the certification. And obviously it depends on the workflow we've got on this side. And it normally takes about 10 days to get those certificates to you. And just want to say as well, I'm going to introduce Luca, and then I'm going to go quiet and I will come back at the end. For those of you who know me, you probably can see that I'm in a very strange place. I'm not in my normal place. And in fact, I'm with my white wolf over me. And just want to share with all of you that on Sunday I broke my ankle. So this is now going to be my big brain challenge for the next 2 months. How to fix my ankle fast.
And let's give our best wishes to Rachel.
Yeah.
Everyone, just send your love, guys, your positive vibes.
Yeah. I'm let's see how I can get my head around this one. Let's get the brain engaged. So everybody, Luca is phenomenal, really. Luca has set up this amazing foundation, which is called Educo in Italy. And it's for children with learning disabilities, learning differences. We're always going to use the word differences rather than disabilities. I think now, Luca, we need to start saying neurodiversity.
Yeah.
I think this now is the word for all educators worldwide. And what we do is, yes, Olivier, neurodivergence and neurodiversity. And, you know, many of you know neurolanguage coaching, neuroheart education. That's what we focus on. We focus on the educator transforming to adapt to the learner instead of the learner adapting to the system. And this is the way forward with education. And actually, I think everything that you talk about, Luca, really is for children and adults, isn't it? Because we have neurodiversity across the board. And Luca, would you introduce yourself a little bit more to everybody? And then I'm going to leave you with the audience.
Of course.
So, see you later, everybody. Ciao.
Ciao. Okay, so I'll share my screen because my presentation is in the presentation. So let me just share the screen. And welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. I know that many of you have already participated or seen the last webinar that we did about learning differences. Okay, so if you don't have, or if you haven't seen the webinar yet, make sure maybe to go back after this, because I'm going to get some of the things here will remind you of what we said before. Today we're going to talk about ADHD and dyspraxia. There's a difference between, you know, the other four that we saw before. So the dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysorthographia, and dysgraphia, which I called differences because, you know, they're There's no difference in intelligence. There's no lack of intelligence in kids with learning differences. Here we're talking about disorders, so it's a different word because ADHD and dyspraxia also affect everyday life activities. Okay, so they're a bit more serious than in terms of what they affect than the learning differences that we saw in the last webinar. Just to remind you about me, I have been teaching kids with learning differences since 2010. As Rachel was saying, I founded a nonprofit organization in 2017 for basically helping families with learning difficulties and learning differences and learning disorders, and also more serious neurological conditions to cope with the economics behind private tutoring. So what we do is we raise money and we take tutors and we give them free education so they can teach students with learning difficulties, and we pay for those hours of private tutoring. So that the Educo, which is the name of the nonprofit organization, was born in 2017. And we have now 3 recurring projects on sustainable education. One that's about kids with learning differences, one that's about kids in general, disadvantaged conditions that could be also just economical or social diversity. And then we have a recurring project with students with the autistic syndrome. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of very big arguments. Last time, I also gave you some insight as to how we detect and test the learning differences. This is more clinical, so I wanted to skip over that because it's very much something that a professional needs to do. But today, we'll see helpful things that hopefully will allow you to be more effective in teaching kids or adults that have ADHD and dyspraxia. So today we're going to understand and see what ADHD and dyspraxia are, what are the symptoms and when they occur. We'll learn about how many children are affected. I'm talking about children here and not just people in general, because they are more prevalent in children. And by the time that you get to an adult state, most of the times dyspraxia is resolved and ADHD is a bit muted. We're going to see the 3 main types of dyspraxia. Now, I love trilogies personally, and if you go online and you educate yourself about dyspraxia and learning and ADHD, you'll find that there are many different labels and types of dyspraxia and ADHD, but there are so little differences between them that I combine them into 3 types, as most people do, for the sake of simplicity, and just because going into much detail kind of defeats the purpose of this webinar. We're going to see also the 3 types of ADHD. Again, here you can find online more than 3 types, but these are, I can assure you, that will cover 99% of the types that you can encounter in your life as a teacher or as a parent or as a brother, relative, and so on. We'll see how they affect learning and how they affect other everyday life activities. So if you were here in the last webinar, you know that learning differences, they affect learning, but in other aspects of life, you would not know about any of the learning differences. With ADHD and dyspraxia, you'll see some difficulties also in other aspects of everyday life. And I'll going to give you some useful tips on how to help students with dyspraxia and ADHD. And these are tips that you don't have to take just for granted. It's something that you need to try to apply with your students and to test out. So things that might work for student A might not work for student B. So in applying the tips that I give you, it's important to understand and to feel the feedback that they give. So let's start with dyspraxia. There are different reasons why this occurs. It's not clear as it was not for learning differences, and it's going to be for ADHD. It's not clear why this happens. There are genetic reasons. So kids with dyspraxia, usually the parents have some aspects that remind of the difficulties of the child. So there are probably genetic reasons behind. Immaturity of neural network. So during development, in the early stages of life, there's a delay in the development of the neural network. And then there are other risk factors that are very, very common towards all landscapes of learning differences and difficulties and disorders. So premature birth, low weight at birth, also traumas during childbirth, and the use of alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs while pregnant or in the presence of an infant. These are not linked. So it's not like I use alcohol, that it means that my son will have or my child will have a learning difference or disorder. It's just the risk factors. You're more likely to. Let's see how many children are affected by dyspraxia. So it is estimated that 5 to 6% of kids between the age of 5 and 11 years old have some level of dyspraxia. By the time that kids become adults, many aspects of the dyspraxia will resolve either by themselves, if the dyspraxia is very is not severe, or with the help of a professional that has some, exercises in place for kids with dyspraxia. It's very interesting to see the ratio. So much as it happens for autism, the boys to girls ratio is quite high. So it's very much more likely than boys have some kind of dyspraxia than girls. This is just to further support the fact that it has to do with genetics. Okay. What is the broad definition of dyspraxia? So dyspraxia is a developmental disorder of the brain in childhood, causing difficulty in activities requiring coordination and movement. So, as we're going to see later, it really can affect a lot of aspects in our life. And you may think that coordination and movement are only something that, it's physical, but as we're going to see, coordination and movement will also apply to speaking, understanding, and planning. So the dyspraxia basically is a developmental coordination disorder. It's something that you can find online. This is basically the most accepted definition of dyspraxia. So the big three in dyspraxia. There are three categories that we can find. The first one is verbal dyspraxia. The second one is motor dyspraxia. And the third one is ideational dyspraxia. Now, again, if you search on the web and you educate yourself, you may find a lot more differences than these three. But these cover the main symptoms that we can find in children and adults with dyspraxia. So let's see what the symptoms of dyspraxia are in verbal dyspraxia specifically. So the kid with verbal dyspraxia will have difficulty making sounds. So as you know, this is especially true and noticeable in children that are starting to speak, because you can hear, comparing them to other children without dyspraxia, that they are not as clear as when they enunciate words or sounds. They have difficulty repeating sequences of sounds or sequences of words. And this is true. Repetition is a problem in dyspraxia and ADHD alike. And we'll see later why. They make different mistakes when saying the same words. They have difficulty with intonation, like speaking in a monotone voice. They have very, very limited vocabulary, and they speak more slowly than fellow peers because they struggle to find the right sound. So they need time to think about what they want to say out loud. And often there's a mismatch in how fast their brain can think and how fast their mouth can process the information that they want to say out loud. One of the most, I think, famous people in the world with clear verbal dyspraxia is Elon Musk. So if you've ever heard Elon Musk speak, you see that he has some difficulty with speaking. It seems like he's really always rushing, and it's not just because English is not his main language, just as the problem that I have now speaking, but it's dyspraxia. So if you search online, you see that Elon Musk has such a fast brain that his mouth can cope. That's not true. This is dyspraxia, a clear symptom of dyspraxia. His brain thinks faster than the mouth can speak clearly. They use more pauses and fewer words than other kids. And they make searching movements with lips and tongue when trying to say a sound. These are basically the symptoms. Let's see what happens with motor dyspraxia and how can I understand and detect if kids that I'm following or teaching have motor dyspraxia. So they are always awkward or clumsy when moving. They have difficulty with writing, with fine movements, with doing up buttons, tying shoelaces, running, jumping. They very, very often bump into other people, objects, or they trip over their own feet. They, again, have difficulty with precise movements. So handwriting is a problem. And when a kid, if you remember our last webinar, when a kid just has problem with the handwriting, with the brain to hand coordination, it's called dysgraphia. They have difficulty changing their clothes. So parents with children with dyspraxia may find useful to buy clothes, maybe shoes without shoelaces, or clothes with zippers instead of buttons. They really very easily make a mess when eating. And last, ideational dyspraxia has something to do basically with planning. So they have a hard time planning complex tasks. So if I have to do something, some consequential actions from A to D, I have a hard time understanding which action I'm required to do first. They use objects incorrectly. So the question is, why isn't this motor dyspraxia? Let's use an example. A kid with motor dyspraxia, when trying to brush their teeth, will have a hard time holding on to the brush, and it's going to fall down a lot of times. But they're going to brush their teeth eventually. They know how the movement works, and they're going to brush their teeth when they're not dropping the toothbrush. A kid with ideational dyspraxia is able to hold the object just fine, the toothbrush, but instead of brushing, it's going to maybe hit the teeth. So it's like literally using an object in the incorrect way because I don't have the coordination. They have a hard time mimicking an action. So if you ask them to copying your movements, they're going to have a hard time doing that. They have a hard time following instructed actions. So if I am standing still, I'm not doing a movement, but I'm instructing them to do some actions, to perform some actions, they're going to have a hard time doing what I am instructing. And that's it for the ideational dyspraxia. We'll see later how this ideational dyspraxia comes into play when learning. and we'll see how you can help students with dyspraxia, with the different kinds of dyspraxia, to to help them study and be less frustrated. So let's shift the focus on ADHD. ADHD, again, happens for genetic reasons. We know that this happens as an alteration of the gene responsible for dopamine production. So studies are more clear on the genetic reasons that cause ADHD or might cause ADHD. We have neurobiological factors. So we have defects in the structure and functioning of the frontal lobe. And again, as with the dyspraxia, other risk factors: premature birth, low weight at birth, traumas during childbirth, and again, the use of alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs while pregnant or in the presence of an infant. These are all risk factors that contribute to the appearance of ADHD. How many children are affected by ADHD? We're going to talk about adults as well. It's estimated that 5% of kids have some level of ADHD, from very subtle to very severe. 2.5% of adults have some level of ADHD. The reduction in the percentage is not very much, just as dyspraxia, the fact that it solves itself, but it's very, very much harder to detect ADHD in adults than in kids. It's less apparent. So it's difficult, it's more difficult to do a diagnosis, and this is why we have a lower percentage. And it is estimated that 1% of kids under the age of 18 have a severe form of ADHD. So the broad definition of ADHD is the attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. There are basically different behaviors that we can find in children and adults with ADHD. There again, they can be divided in three main categories. Basically, they have to do just as much as learning as they have to do with everyday life activities. So the big three are inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Hyperactivity and impulsivity are often put together, so this is why we're going to see them as a whole, meaning that the kid that has hyperactivity very, very likely is also an impulsive kid as well, or adult. Let's start with inattention. So having ADHD and being inattentive means having a short attention span and being easily distracted. And by easily, I mean very, very easily. I was working with students with ADHD, and a mosquito would completely destroy their attention for like 10 or 15 minutes. So once they lose the concentration is lost. We need to go to other activities and then move back to what we were doing before. Otherwise, it's just going to be the mosquito. They make careless mistakes. So in schoolwork, what we maybe call silly mistakes are easily made by the kid with ADHD. Like maybe they are copying an equation and they write a 5 instead of a 6. They appear forgetful and they lose things quite easily. They are unable to stick to tasks that are tedious or time-consuming, and it's not written here, but also repetitive. And if you remember from my previous webinar, one of the worst things you can do with children with learning differences in general is use repetition as a form of teaching. That doesn't work. And with kids with ADHD, it not just doesn't work, it's really hurtful for them. So it's very, very tedious to do the same task over and over again. They appear to be unable to listen or to carry out instruction, and appear to be unable to listen is important here. The appearing part, we'll see why a bit later in the tips. Let's see the hyperactive impulsive kid. Basically, they are unable to sit still, especially in calm or quiet surroundings. They are constantly fidgeting. So if you remember a fad that happened a few years ago, fidget spinners were all the rage. If you were a parent with the kids between the age of like 5 and 10, you bought a fidget spinner to one of your children. They were like different kinds of toys that you could roll and twirl and just they basically redirect your attention to a movement of your hands. Now, fidget spinners were a fad that became all of a sudden. They were a great marketing tool for a lot of companies to make a lot of money as a toy. But fidget spinners were born specifically to aid in students with ADHD, autism, because they are able to redirect the attention into a movement. So I'm able to concentrate on what I'm doing, because my all the movements that I want to do without that I want to do without thinking, I'm just doing them with my fingers. So fidget spinners are something that I use with my students with ADHD, and I see that they are helpful because their brain is doing something while they're listening to me. They're listening to me, and their willingness of moving around is expressed through fidget spinners. They are unable to concentrate on tasks, as well as kids with inattention. They have excessive physical movement. And this is something that, as we'll see later, is not something that you need to ask them to avoid. So kids with hyperactive ADHD need to move around. They need to use energy. And even if they're moving around and it seems like they're not listening to me, most of the times, because they are doing this movement with their body, they are able to concentrate their voice on me. So if you ask them to sit still, that's not going to work. The physical movement is something that they need. They have excessive talking. So they're many times, if you're doing a task that requires silence, for example, they're writing something, they need to express what they're writing. So they'll say out loud, for example. They're unable to wait their turn. They act without thinking. And they always interrupt conversations. It's not rudeness, it's ADHD. So let's see how dyspraxia comes into play when learning. Now, dyspraxia is something that it's often misinterpreted as other symptoms. So if I have a kid with dyspraxia, with motor dyspraxia, because maybe they have difficulty tying their shoes, I just think that it's something that they're going to learn by themselves. And most of the times then they do. But it's an alarm that you need to be able to perceive, because sometimes the inability to perform a motor task also explains what they're having a hard time, for example, learning by heart. So I made a table here, which you may screenshot, that can help you, which explain which dyspraxia comes into play and how it comes into play with different activities. So for example, writing and dictation, verbal dyspraxia. If I have wrong sounds in my head, I can have poor orthography. So this comes into play as dysorthographia. I do spelling mistakes, okay? Because I can't find the right sound in my mind. Studying by heart and repeating concepts. If I'm struggling to find the right words, that can be mistaken for lack of knowledge. So if I'm doing an oral test with the teacher and I'm struggling to find words, the first thing that the teacher will think is, okay, he has not studied. Okay, but the kid with dyspraxia knows the concepts. It just needs time to put them together and saying them out loud. Motor dyspraxia. In writing and dictation, they have inability to hold pen correctly. This can result in intelligible handwriting, which is dysgraphia, which we talked about in the last webinar. And this is very, very easily corrected with the use of a keyboard. But many, many teachers don't understand that handwriting in 2022 is not an essential part of life anymore when you're going to work. Nobody writes an email with a pen, okay? So some teachers still, enforce the use of the pen and paper, where what you need to do is just use a keyboard with a spell check, which is something that we always have on hand on our phone and on our computers anyway. With studying by heart and repeating concepts, motor dyspraxia, kids with motor dyspraxia have a hard time highlighting the textbook. So the inability to highlight the textbook makes me also, it makes more difficult to understand what I'm reading and to retain information. So this can result in lower ability to understand what's written, lower retention of information. And so I'm having a harder time studying by heart. And finally, we also have the ideational dyspraxia that comes into play in writing and dictation, because my inability to plan ahead results in incohesive, incomplete thoughts. This is very, very apparent in essays. My thoughts are not coordinated. I cannot connect cause and effect, and my reasoning seems completely off. Okay. As well, in studying by heart and repeating concepts, if I'm doing an oral exam, my inability to plan really comes into play, and this results again in incohesive and incomplete thoughts. So I'm speaking, I'm saying the concepts, I'm saying out loud the information, but the teacher just understands that I have not studied, even if maybe I spent hours and hours on books. Let's see ADHD and learning. So now let's highlight the three main categories. I've divided them into here of ADHD and how they affect learning. So again, here a table. If you want to screenshot it, feel free. In writing and dictation, the inattentive kid easily loses concentration. So they have a higher number of mistakes and missing words whenever they are writing something or they are doing a dictation exercise. In studying by heart and repeating concepts back, it's very, very hard to retain information because they lack the attention and concentration needed to read a paragraph from start to finish. The hyperactive impulsive kids, due to hyperactivity, this dictation is just something that it's not possible to enforce on them. They, first of all, need to sit still for dictation. Second of all, they need to be concentrated on what they're saying, translating them into words in my mouth, and then coordinate with my hand to write on paper. As much as possible, dictation should be avoided with kids with hyperactive impulsive ADHD. Again, with studying by heart and repeating concepts, it's very, very hard to internalize information. If I internalize information, I can repeat it, but I need to do some physical tasks in order to maintain concentration. But sometimes there are interruptions and missing information inside the information that I'm trying to say out loud. I want to explain how you're able to help your students. So until now, what we saw with dyspraxia and ADHD, first of all, is very general because they are very, very deep concepts, medical concepts. But there are some things that you can do for your students if you think that they have dyspraxia, or if you know that they have dyspraxia or ADHD. Again, not all the tips that I'm going to give you here apply to every single one of the students. It's very much a job of personalization. So you need to try the technique, see if it helps. If it doesn't, try something else. But these are general pinpoints that are very, very easy to apply and can give you an edge when teaching, especially a language, which is one of the hardest thing to learn for kids with learning differences. So just allow them to use a keyboard. Okay, if their handwriting is intelligible, it's just a pain for them and a pain for me to enforce the use of pen and paper. Allow them to use a keyboard. Allow them to use spell check. If they have dyspraxia, dysorthographia, or dysgraphia, their best friend is going to be spoken language anyway, and their best friend is going to be spell check if they have to write an email. Okay. Read aloud and use audiobooks. So if you're studying with a child or an adult with dyspraxia, take things into your own hands and read the pages aloud. It's way more easy for them to listen than to read. Audiobooks are also a great source of information for kids and adults with dyspraxia. Give them enough time to express. There's nothing worse than them struggling to find the word and I speak for them. So if you know that they're going to say bottle, just don't say bottle. Shut up for a brief second. Allow them the time to find the word in their brain and to say it out loud. And if they say it wrong, it doesn't matter. Don't speak for them unless you are asked to do so. So if they ask you for help, I can't find the word. What's the word that I'm looking for? Help them. If not, just wait. Don't correct every mistake they made. They're going to make a lot of them. And to just stop them each time and address every single mistake, it's going to hurt their self-esteem. So let's do their thing and go back a little bit later and say, hey, let's see what can be done better. Let's see what mistakes they've made. Oh, you wrote bottle with 1 T instead of 2. Doesn't matter. Spell check will cover for you when you need to write the word. If something needs planning, put it on a paper, better a virtual paper. So if they need to do some activities, consequential activities, show them on a virtual paper. Put them on the paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you use images, even better. So that if they need to perform some kind of task, they can always use that virtual paper, those images as reference. This is very, very helpful for them. Use visual aids. So videos and images are great. Everything that can, substitute the use of pen and paper and the use of and the action of reading something. Videos and images were great. Allow them more time for written tests and oral exams. And let's start with this. So if you're a teacher in school and you have students with dyspraxia, you can do a couple of things. First of all, you can give them more time. So if you are giving them a written test, you can give them, instead of 1 hour, 1 hour and 20 minutes. If that's not an option because the allotted time that you have for that particular subject is 1 hour, then reduce the amount of questions in the tests for them so that they have more time to do fewer questions. Don't highlight the fact that they have a differentiated test, because diversity and differentiation in kids, especially, it's still something that causes them some kind of embarrassment. So if you're a teacher in a classroom, use discretion unless the student is in a safe environment and shares with their friends that they have a dyspraxia and they have facilitated tests, then go ahead and don't hide it. But if you can, use discretion. Lastly, avoid as much as possible those tricky multiple choice tests. So there are a lot of teachers that they want to use multiple choice questions because it's just easier to check if it's correct or not. And to make it a bit harder, that they do so that the differences between the different options are very, very minimal. Now, a kid that doesn't have any type of learning difference will not have a hard time doing those kinds of detecting those kinds of differences. But for a student with dyspraxia or ADHD or any learning disorder, those very, very similar answers are just equal. So you're just going to get a random outcome out of their test. So avoid multiple choice as much as possible. Allow them to express themselves either in written form or, if they prefer it, in spoken form. Again, it's a matter of preference. Some kids with dyspraxia and dysgraphia still prefer to write things because they have anxiety related to speak in front of the classroom or speak with the teacher. So if they prefer writing, even if they are dyspraxic, don't worry, just allow them to write. Let's see how to help students with ADHD. And with helping students with ADHD, it's not a lot about compensatory tools and educational accommodation, such as giving them more time, but it's going to take a lot of your patience. So children with ADHD or adults with ADHD require us to have an infinite amount of patience to help them successfully. First of all, don't require them to sit still. If they need to move around, they need to move around. Okay, maybe try with fidget spinners, try with some activities that they can do with their hands or feet, so that they can sit. But if they need to move around, when I don't know, they are repeating you something, allow them to move around inside the room. It's like when you're in bed at night and you cannot sleep and you feel like you have to move your legs every 10 seconds and you can't stop, and it's just that very, very unpleasant sensation that I cannot stay still with my legs. This is something that for them happens 24/7. They need to move, so don't require them to sit still. Give information is in very small quantities. So if they are inattentive ADHD kids or adults, you need to prepare the lesson so that you can give them small bursts of information. Give them the information. Ask them to repeat the information back to make sure that they have understood the information, and do a brief pause. Okay, so this is very, very much, it's so difficult to do because it requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of mental structures in our head, because we need to understand when we started a break, where we need to go back and start the conversation again. So give information in small quantities. To do so, prepare the lesson in advance. Okay, so 5-10 minutes of lesson, 5-10 minutes of break. Try different kind of arrangements to see which one fits best. Maybe some adults with ADHD can go up to 30 minutes. It's something that you can need to test for yourself and understand. And also, if you're dealing with an adult, it's much easier to get feedback from them. Okay, they can tell you much easier, "Hey, I'm tired. Can we just stop for a second?" Whereas a kid, you might need to understand it by feeling, seeing how they move around the room, how inattentive they are, and so forth. Use a lot of images, stories, and short videos. So with kids, stories work very, very well because they are engaged in the story. So it's easier to them to keep concentration if they are hearing concepts through a story than just straight up from a book or just me telling them. So if you're, for example, explaining the cycle of water, instead of just going through the usual steps, invent a story with a drop of water named Steve, okay, that goes down from the sky and goes into the ground, and then it reaches a river, and it's going to be very, very much more engaging for them. So stories work perfect. For adults, images and videos grab the attention much more, so you can use those with adults. Use different colors or always use the same color. This is something that depends kids from kid. So some ADHD, well, people, not just children, some ADHD people, people with ADHD really, really like and really, really thrive with using different colors to make mental maps, for example, or to highlight the book. Whereas other are very, very sensitive to changing in color. So it's going to be more distracting for them. So try both techniques, see what works, and continue to apply that. Ask them to repeat what they are required to do. So if you give them a task and they're moving around, maybe they're listening, maybe they're not. So just ask them a question. So tell me, what did I ask you to do? And see if they give you the answer back. If they tell you what they were instructed to do, then you know that they have listened and they can carry out the task when they're ready. Don't engage them in repetitive tasks. This is like seriously something that you never do with kids with ADHD, unless they specifically like to do so. There are some kids with ADHD that like repetition, but they're very, very small percentage. Most of them absolutely hate repetition. So no writing the same word 150 times. This is true also for adults. So if you're trying to teach a word and that word doesn't retain in their memory, find other ways to, to teach the word to them. Try to use it in different sentences. Use images or use something that happened to you in a story, but don't ask them to repeat the same word all over again, because this doesn't help them and drains completely their energy. Use physical activities as breaks. So if you're dealing with children up to teenagers, if you're giving them a burst of information and you see that they are starting to be attentive, ask them to take you a glass of water. And when they do come back with a glass of water, ask them for a snack. And when they do come back with a snack, ask them to take a pen. Use physical activities as breaks without them noticing, okay? Because that's going to lower the amount of motor energy that they need in order to stay concentrated. And they're going to be fresher when they come back to continue the lesson. So if you're, for example, a teacher in a class and you have a student with ADHD, they're the perfect kid for the photocopier job. If you need photocopies, just ask them to run them, to take photocopies, or to go to the janitor to ask for something. They're their go-to guy. They're going to be the best ones because the physical activity is going to be beneficial for their learning. Don't interrupt their interruptions. Okay, so we saw that children with hyperactive, impulsive tend to very much interrupt. If they're interrupting you, don't interrupt them back and say, "Hey, I was saying this." The fact that they're interrupting you is very much a sign that they are tired. So take the interruption, allow them to say whatever it is that they wanted to say, understand that they're probably at their limit, find other activities to do that they can move around, or watch a video, or sing a song, or listen to something. If they're interrupting you a lot, it means that they are tired, most likely. I want to give you an example, a real case study of something that happened to me with a student with ADHD. So kids with ADHD generally, as we said, are really require to move around to function. Okay, and this is why with dyspraxia and ADHD, it's just not something that affects their learning and their time in school, but it's something that is prevalent and it's prominent even in their day-to-day life. A person that absolutely hates repetition is cannot perform certain jobs, so has less choices that they can make if they're looking for a job at some point. A kid that doesn't know how to tie his or her shoes when they're 10 or 11, it's not just something that is noticeable when I'm teaching, but in a everyday life, if they're walking around and they have the shoelaces that are untied, they may choose not to stop and tie them because they are embarrassed of the fact that people can notice that they cannot tie them. So they may fall down, they may trip. Okay, so ADHD and dyspraxia affect everyday life. And I had a student with ADHD that was very much one of the kids that expressed himself with through movement. So he could not sit still for more than 5 seconds. Usually I needed to close the doors of their rooms, of the parents and their rooms, just confine them into a space that I could see them. And I remember once he sat down and he looked me in the face and was like, "Look, I'm so tired to move around. I'm so tired. I cannot stand it anymore." 1 second, he jumps and starts moving back, because the desire, the physical need of moving is way stronger than the tiredness that they can experience because they're just moving always around. Now kids, this particular student that I was following, of course he needed medical help, something that I could not give him. He now he has been able to cope with ADHD, so now he's way less into, he needs he doesn't need to move as much. But I remember there are some kids that cannot express themselves because maybe they have ADHD and dyspraxia, and maybe they cannot tell you that they are tired, and you need to understand it. So when it comes to teaching kids especially, you need to be very attentive, because they may not say out loud that they are tired and they need a break, but they are going to give you any kind of signal that they are tired and they need a break. Most of the signals that they give you will drive you nuts. I can tell you as an educator, sometimes it's very overwhelming to cope with students with ADHD, because at some point after, like, you know each other for a bit, it's easier to get frustrated that they just can't stop moving, they can't stop speaking, they can't stop interrupting you. And it's the passion for the education that we have that needs to put the brake on our willingness or our impulse to just tell them, okay, now just sit down and stop talking, we need to do this. So if you have a student with ADHD, make sure to have breaks yourself. Okay, so the breaks are not just for the student. If you need to go to the bathroom to just, not hear him talk anymore, do that. Okay, it's very, very important that your mental health in that moment is a priority, because if you're leaving the lesson and if you're in the lesson with a bad mood because you're frustrated and you're tired, first of all, imagine what they're going through. Okay, because it's something that they cannot control. Second of all, you're not going to be able to help him. So the breaks are not just for the kid or the adult with the ADHD, but also for the educator. And this is very, very, very important. Okay, so we have more or less 5 minutes left for some questions from your side. I would love to read the chat now. So if you have any question, please go ahead and
Yes, Luca, thank you,
ask
thank
it
you, thank
away.
you. As always, phenomenal, phenomenal. And I know that you're going to help a lot of the teachers here and a lot of those who are going to get the recordings. Now, I did see quite a few questions along the way. May I ask everybody who wrote a question, could you just repeat the questions right at the bottom for us so that we don't have to go back and scroll everything? So, right, Lila has just given us her question there. Luca.
So are there any theories about there being gender biases in diagnostic criteria for dyspraxia and for autistic spectrum conditions? Yes, absolutely. So the fact that we know that boys are more likely to have ADHD and dyspraxia and autism feeds into the, the fact that when I'm doing a diagnosis, if it's a boy, I'm more likely to say, oh yeah, probably this is autism or ADHD. But this is why we have very standardized tests in place so that this bias do not affect our judgment. The judgment comes from the test, not from the professional itself. So if I may think that someone has, ADHD or autism, I may think that I may be biased, but then the tests are either going to confirm or deny what I'm thinking.
And how or where can you get the tests that detect learning difficulties as you gave it previously?
So I have a few references. If you want to send me a message on this email so that I can, I'm still, by the way, I'm still sharing my screen. So send me a message on my email. Last time, I know that some of you contacted me. I don't know what happened to my email. You either blasted it, I don't know. I failed to respond to some of you because I could not see the emails going in. I just had some error messages. So if you wrote to the email previously in a first webinar and I haven't responded, please do send me the email again, because most likely I didn't see it.
And what happens with students who have to present hard exams, especially with international exams, language tests, etc.?
Yeah, so now these kinds of these schools and very, very established platform for tests and exams are starting to become a bit more diverse in the way that they give these exams. Unfortunately, most of them don't allow for any modifications yet. So if you know that some English, certification doesn't allow for these kinds of modification for kids with learning differences, send them an email. Tell them that they need to implement this. Our voice needs to be heard.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just trying to recover a document which I'm going to put into the chat box as well. There is, Erica is asking, is it a good option that people with these issues learn a new language, or could it be a bad practice for them?
So it's always a good option to learn a new language. It can be frustrating at times. So if there's a willingness to learn a new language, it's just about motivation and help them understand that it's going to take a bit more time for them, but eventually they'll get there. So it's important not to feed into the sense of helplessness that they can feel at times when learning a new language. If something that you're teaching just doesn't stick, put it away for a second and let's try again a bit later.
Yeah, and I just want to enforce that idea, I think it's about us finding the way that those people learn. And I think neurodiverse, all of us are neurodiverse, and it's about finding out how each and every one of us learn, because potentially we're all different. And language learning is one of the best things that we can do, because it really is brain gym. It's strengthening neural networks. It's one of the best things that we can do as we get older. Honestly, it's one of the most recommended activities for the brain as we mature, I'm going to say. I'm going to see if I can find a study I did with ADHD and language learning. And I'll put that in the chat box, because definitely people are able to learn languages and they can learn very, very well. But there were some things in this study that I discovered, and one of the best things was one-to-one sessions. Yeah. Really coming into how they learn, obviously with a coach, and understanding their brain. It really helped people to learn. Yeah. So, and I think this is for all of us. It really is understanding ourselves and how we tick and how we stick information in, definitely. Right, next question, Luca. We have...
I see one. What is the difference between tics disorder and dyspraxia? Or does tic disorders belong to dyspraxia? So tics disorder, also one that's coming more prominent now, Tourette syndrome, tic disorder and Tourette syndrome, are involuntary movements. So something that we don't want to do, we do it because our brain is firing up. Dyspraxia affects voluntary actions. So I'm trying to tie my shoelaces, but I just can't. Okay, so this is the difference. Yeah. So they're not the same.
Yeah. And everybody, Gary has put that link into the chat box. So if you're interested in that study with ADHD and language learning, see if it affects the process of language learning, do have a look. And underneath that, there is another question, Luca. How is ADHD different from having mannerisms?
I'm not quite clear on what mannerisms means in this context. Can you help me, Rachel? Or maybe Beth, if you can elaborate a bit more.
Beth, if you're there, if you can just give us a little bit more clarity on what you mean with mannerisms. And I think Beth hopefully will clarify that for us.
And in the meantime, for those who are still connected here, I really encourage you to go see the TED Talk called "Want to Help? Shut Up and Listen." It doesn't have to do with teaching specifically, but it's something that I think gives you a very, very good understanding of what it means to, if you want to help, you need to understand what's in front of you, and to understand what's in front of you, you need to ask questions. You need to perceive their behavior.
Yeah. And as you said, ask questions and listen.
And listen.
That's the most important thing. Yes. Beth, just wondering if you want to clarify what you mean with mannerisms, just so that we can answer your question there. In the meantime, just to remind everybody, there will be the recording of the webinar, and you will get the recording with the slides on it. So you will have the visuals there. I think some of you are asking about the slides. Could you repeat the name of the TikTok? No, I think it was TED Talk, wasn't it?
Of the TED Talk, yeah. It's called Want to Help? Shut Up and Listen.
Right.
Up and listen.
Yeah, great.
It's from an Italian, Ernesto Sirolli. You're going to laugh out loud. Ernesto Sirolli is just really, really great. So I can see that Beth has elaborated. So it's something that people do involuntarily, like flicking their fingers or playing with pen. again, that sounds to me more like an involuntary small movement, whereas a child with ADHD or an adult with ADHD really needs to move around the room and to rotate and to stand up and sit down and walk and talk. So it's very intense. You'll see the difference if you have a student with ADHD.
Luca, thank you so much. How about a few words about how people can help Educo?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you, as a nonprofit organization, what we do is we raise money to give back to families with children in need, which means, again, they can have a learning difference, a learning disorder, or just be in a social or economical poor situation. So if you know any, European tenders that can help us, or if you know, any maybe big donor that is, very much into education, or just, have some contacts that can help me put Educo on the map globally and not just in Italy, that would be very helpful.
And neurolanguage coaches, I know there's quite a few neurolanguage coaches in the audience. We will be also doing what we did over the last years. We'll be putting out there a volunteer form for any of you who do have Italian language and would like to do some volunteer work with some of the children that Luca and the foundation are working with. I think some of you know that we had some neurolanguage coaches over the last years, and there's been some beautiful success stories there, Luca.
Absolutely. We got the information from one of the moms that one of the students that was followed by a neurolanguage coach. He basically was a very high achieving hockey player. He basically got hurt during a match, and he is now in a wheelchair and will not be able to walk anymore. And when he was in the hospital during COVID, by the way, so he was very much alone. He started to do lessons with a neurolanguage coach. So they started talking in English, and he fell in love with the language and the way of teaching. He graduated just a couple of months ago, with like highest vote in English. And the mom came back to us to congratulate, first of all, the educator and the neurolanguage coach that helped him, and we were very much thrilled to learn that.
Yes, yeah, fantastic, phenomenal. Luca, thank you so much. We will probably see if we can get you back to do some more talks. We are going to be seeing how we can work together, as we now have our green light for the NeuroHeart Education Foundation as well. So we're going to see how together as two foundations we can help each other and bring more awareness globally to everything that you're doing, and that we're doing as well with neurolanguage coaching and NeuroHeart education. And somebody is actually asking if you're present in LATAM, in South America.
We are not. So there's also a very big part on educating people about learning differences and ADHD and dyspraxia. So I am very much happy to present these webinars that I'm doing to anyone that might have an audience that's interested. Awareness is always a big thing for me.
Absolutely. So if any of you do want Luca to arrange a webinar for schools, for educators in your region. Luca, ¿hablas español también o?
Poquito.
Poquito. Pero potreste fare in italiano anche.
Anche sì.
In Latin America, there's a lot of people that do speak Italian, so there could be that sort of bilingual webinar. Yes. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, and just want to remind if some of you are out there interested in neuro-language coaching, just want to give a little bit of a heads up to the next courses that we are running. It's not coming up. And just to say thank you for being here, that if you do sign up for any of the upcoming courses, we would be also sending you a couple of free books. If you want any more information as a neuro-language coach, because I know there's quite a few of you in the audience, if you want any info about how to become a volunteer with Luca, let me know, because we do have some forms especially for you. There is that requirement, as you know, in neuro-language coaching, we normally scaffold a lot from target native language. So there is that sort of desire that there is that Italian knowledge as well, to be able to calm the children, to help the children go through those coaching conversations as well if they are stressed. And definitely, if any of you have any questions for us or for Luca, do connect with us.